surprise shone light from distant northern skies. At that point, realized I don't know where it comes from, but I know it's okay. This is all an illusion, and I'm willing to play.
Welcome to the Quantum Guide Show, interviews with awakened masters as they share their quantum work with you. The Quantum Guide Show is produced by Karen Holton, creator of the 9 Steps to Quantum Health Transformation, a free 9-step online course to give you the tips and resources you need to thrive. Karen lost and continues to keep off 178 pounds of surplus body weight as she made her dreams come true. Whether you are awakening to the ascension process or simply want a wiser, more efficient lifestyle, this program is for you. No strings attached. The Quantum Guide Show is brought to you in part by Zendome's Orgonite, Karen's unique brand of orgone generators, ethically sourced, handmade, and double charged for maximum effect. Find out how orgone generators work and what they can do for you. Don't be fooled by imitations. Check out Karen's current selection, only available from her website, KarenHoltonHealthCoach.com, and on Facebook, facebook.com/Quantum Health Transformation. Enjoy the show.
Welcome back to the Quantum Guide Show. Today in episode 50, part 1, our guest is Veda Austin, and she is going to share with us some of her amazing discoveries about the macroscopic evidence of water responding to human consciousness. Veda is a water researcher, public speaker, mother, artist, and author. She has dedicated the last 8 years observing and photographing the life of water. She believes that water is fluid intelligence, observing itself through every living organism on the planet and in the universe. Her primary area of focus is photographing water in its state of creation, the space between liquid and ice. It is through her remarkable crystallographic photos that water reveals its awareness of not only creation, but thought and intention through imagery. Veda brings a message of hope and joy from the very source of life itself. She says, water is transparent. It knows no color, creed, or religion. Water does not judge, nor does it label. It will enter the body of an ant as easily as it will enter the body of a king, or a homeless person, or a tree, or a dragonfly. Water is our constant companion. From the moment we are conceived, it is always with us, even upon death. It is the water that evaporates from the physical, rising upward into the heavens. Veda sees water as source rather than a resource and considers all bodies of water to be sacred. Her passion for water extends out of the freezer and into primary schools, where she donates time teaching water science and cleverly intertwines it with art projects. She loves to reconnect children to the living water systems inside and outside of their bodies, believing that the Tamaraki, which are children, are the water bearers of the future. She also spends a lot of time doing interviews and podcasts where she shares her findings and inspiring perspectives. Please do check out her book called The Secret Intelligence of Water, Macroscopic Evidence of Water Responding to Human Consciousness. And you can find more details about it on her website, www.vedaaustin.com, and the links will be posted below in the description. Be sure to come back and tune in next week for part 2 of this amazing presentation. Hi, Veda. Thank you so much for joining me on the Quantum Guide Show today.
It's such a pleasure, and thank you so much for having me.
Definitely my pleasure. And I think the viewers are really going to get a lot out of this. I got to tell you, the first time I saw one of your presentations, it really blew me away. It wasn't my first exposure to the consciousness of water because there's actually scriptures from the Essene manuscripts that talk about the angel of the water and the healing properties. So then when I heard your presentation, I went, wow, this is fantastic stuff. And it's really positive and it gives hope to people in these confusing, turbulent times. It's nice to be able to focus on something not only positive, but something that can make a big difference in our lives. So with that, I will turn it over to you, Veda, and you have a slideshow presentation for part one.
I do, and I really like what you said about the positive message, because one of the things that I often say is that when you observe water, water is always going back to source. It might have to go around a few rocks, it might have to make a long journey, but it's always heading towards source, just like we are. And so with that, I will share a little bit about who inspired me to start this journey and this work with water, and share some of the photographs, because often pictures speak 1,000 words. So when you see what I'm talking about, it will help your viewers to understand why I'm so enthusiastic about sharing this and doing this. So I'll just screen share, and I'll just kind of talk you through my work here. So my inspirations, I'll just push play here. So of course, anyone that has really been looking into the work of consciousness in water would have seen Masaru Emoto's work. He was not really embraced by the scientific community, but his work was still extremely valid to so many millions of people across the world, because so often people are so visual, and when you see what has happened here, his work is showing you something important in contrast. And essentially what he was doing was, in this situation, using words as an influence prior to freezing. So his work was microscopic, and he would take microscopic photographs of a little water drop after it had been exposed to, in this example, the words "you fall" and the words "thank you." And they obviously show you that there are very contrasting responses to these words. And so often in life we see life in contrast. And so I really enjoyed looking at these visuals, but even more so, I enjoyed looking at the visuals of someone who has become a good friend of mine. He's a French photographer. He takes microscopic photos like Masaru Emoto did, but Laurent does not like the idea of being the influencer. He believes that water is sovereign unto itself and has something to share, and that he didn't like the idea of basically saying that he was experimenting or influencing water, and that very much resonated with me. For around 15 years I worked professionally as an artist, I do big oil and canvas paintings for hotels and restaurants and companies. And so I see the world from a very artistic perspective. So when I saw imagery microscopically appear in Laurent's work, where I saw a happy face and a heart, it really made me feel something a little different. Not to say that geometries don't affect us in some way, and of course so much of the world is made up of geometry and sacred geometry, but for me personally, imagery really spoke to me, and when I see a happy face, it makes me smile. These are some more happy faces that showed up in the water that Laurent took, and I love these kind of expressions of water, where you're seeing a kind of almost face in water. So then, this man is not so well known. His name is Thomas Hieronymus, and he was a radionic engineer. And what he observed was that when he went into a Parisian meat market, he noticed that the freshly placed organs of an animal appeared to be affecting the way the frost froze on the glass behind where they were placed. For example, the shape of a liver organ appeared to inspire the frost to freeze into the shape of a liver organ. And so that is a macroscopic freezing that he was seeing. And his idea was that there was still some kind of life force energy emanating out of these organs, even though they were no longer attached to an animal. And he believed that was because there was life force energy still held within the water of the blood. So that gave me some hope to be able to start investigating for myself, because back then, 8.5 years ago, I didn't have a microscope. But Thomas Hieronymus had seen something with his naked eye. He'd seen a macroscopic version. And so I thought, well, I want to see for myself. I want to see if water really can store information in some way. Because I'm very much a believer, don't read and believe everything you see, like that you read, or everything that someone tells you. If you can investigate it for yourself, all the better. And so I had a petri dish, I had some fabulous water that had helped to heal my body, and I had my imagination, and I had my iPhone camera. And so that was the very rudimentary start of investigation. So my idea was that I would simply project a thought into the petri dish of water. However, what I noticed was that there was a little bit of fluff that was floating around in the dish of water that I had. So I was like, oh God. So I put my hand in to take the fluff out, consciously thinking, I wonder if my hand will have any impact on the water's quote-unquote memory. Because back then I really didn't know what it could do. I didn't know if it had memory or not. And so that was the inspiring influence. That thought was projected into the water. So I went ahead and put it into the freezer, because the secret was always in the freezing, with Emoto's work, Laurent's work, and also with what Thomas Hieronymus had observed. So there's a saying that nature hides her secrets well. And so with water, it seems that there is a magical space that space that is created as water begins to freeze. But in these early stages, I didn't know what the exact space was, so I simply completely froze water. So I forgot about it for a while, and they're like, oh yeah, there's that petri dish. So I pulled it out, held it up to the light, and took a photo. And the photo I'm about to show you has launched somewhere in the region of nearly 17,000 photos of water responding intelligently to influence. And so this was my very original photograph, which you can see is a hand. It's kind of a skeletal hand, almost like an X-ray, but the interesting thing about it is that there are two of the fingers that are slightly bent, and I inherited my mother's slightly bent fingers, and so it is very relative to my physical hand. And although I was a little freaked out when I saw it, because I really didn't expect to see something so large, because this took up half of the petri dish, and I didn't expect to see a hand in such a visual way either. And so I took a photo of it, and I showed my son Rama, and he didn't know what I'd been doing, and he didn't know what he was looking at. And I said, Rama, what does this look like to you? And he said, like I was stupid, he's like, oh, it's a hand, Mum. It's kind of a creepy hand, but still. And I was like, yeah, it is. And so then I went down to the beach, because I lived near the ocean, and because I thought if any warm water will be naturally informed without me influencing it or inspiring it, then surely it has to be seawater. And so I froze a little seawater, and I got this image of a fish. You can see the perfectly round eye, the outline of the fish's body and the fins, and there's different textures because seawater freezes quite differently than fresh water. And so then I started really launching into using all different methods of inspiring influences. I'll just state that I don't like using the word experiment, because I'm a body of water that doesn't want to be experimented on, and because I am getting such intelligent responses in water, And with over 16,000 of these photos of water literally co-creating with me, responding to me, I'm actually getting a response. So we're co-creating. So I want to give water the same respect. And I don't want to use the word experiment because that's not the mindset I have with doing this work. I tend to use the word inspiration, inspiring influence, so that people understand what I'm talking about. So I wanted to see how water might recognize photos, if it would recognize and display to me that it actually recognized facial features. So the photos that I'm going to show you are around about a year and a half to 2 years into my work, when my technique has really changed, and I'm going to share a little bit about that as we go along. So the photo on the right is my friend Wendy's photo, and she kindly let me use it. And so you can see that the water has taken a snapshot of her profile, of her features that are very much relative to Wendy. So what I did was place my petri dish of water on top of her photograph for 30 seconds. I just like 30 seconds. There's no real reason for it. I actually don't need to do it for anywhere near that long. I've seen water do this within seconds, but I use that number just because I like it. And then I remove it and freeze it using my new short-term crystallographic method. So my work now only takes under 5 minutes. And so I wanted to see if it would do it with lots of different people. So this is an earlier stage. So my friend Laurent Costa, whose work I just shared with you, he sent me this photo of himself, and he said, can you please show it to water to see what it might do? And this was when I still totally froze water, and you can see that it's shown his profile in the ice. This is a more recent, this was done this year, where I used a coin, a Roman coin with a face on it, as the inspiring influence, and you can see that water has designed it very clearly. This is an example of when water freezes just a little bit too long. However, you can see that it has already designed the outline of this face, this statue of Jupiter, otherwise known as Zeus. It's also a front version of a face, and you can see that it has identified all of the features, including the beard and the hair. This, not brilliant photo, but the quality-wise, I mean, is a snapshot of someone I think is just fabulous, called Igor, that gave a talk at the 2019 water conference, and I asked if I could use his photo to show the water his face, and he was quite happy with that. And so you can see that it's taken on his specific features. So then this is Biggie Smalls. So he's a rapper, for anybody that doesn't really know who he is. One of the reasons I used this photo, and this was done last year, is that Masaru Emoto used some music in a very contrasting way as his influence in his work. And in his work, it really only shows classical studies and versus heavy metal. And I'm pretty sure that whoever did the heavy metal one probably didn't like heavy metal and probably preferred classical studies. And classical music, but I like classical studies. But anyway, and so my son, he said to me, well, Mum, you know, I like rap. And so does that mean that if I'm not listening to classical music, the water in my body just isn't liking it at all, and it's doing all kinds of horrible things? And I was thinking, no, I don't feel that water is like that. I feel that water is simply expressing and dancing to the sound of different frequencies. And so I went on this great big long kind of project of taking photos of water that was inspired by many different genres of music. And because my son liked rap, I used this photo of Biggie Smalls as an inspiring influence. And so you can see that it has taken on his particular features. And it's an interesting kind of texture that's also developed in the ice. So, and you can see how large it is in the petri dish. I used Sadhguru. I have a lot of people that are very interested in my work that follow and love Sadhguru, so I used his photo as the inspiring influence, and you can see that water has taken his features on, even down to the thing that he has around his head. I used myself, a photo of me looking away when I was in California, and you can see that water has taken on my features there. And I used my children, so quite some years ago, when I go into schools, this particular one was done when I just went through a very small stage of adding drops of colour to the water, because it helps to kind of show the different patterns that form. And it's interesting because water almost uses the colour like watercolour pictures and moves the water where it wants to go before it freezes. It's very interesting. And this was a time when I froze the water just a little bit longer. So you're kind of seeing these different stages. In the very left-hand side, where my daughter's ear is, in the ice, you can actually see that there is like a spiral where her ear is, which is quite beautiful. And one of the projects that I do with children when I go into schools is I teach them how to do this work, but I also do this part where they can choose if they want to add some colours to make it a little bit fun. And so this is why it's that colour. And as my technique has progressed, I discovered that there were two types of water in water. I discovered that because as I started to understand more about my friend and colleague Dr. Gerald Pollack's work, he talks a lot about the fourth phase of water and the stage between liquid and ice. And as water changes from molecular chaos and turns into molecular order. And so I started opening my freezer earlier and earlier and earlier to see what was actually happening in the freezer with the ice and what it was doing, see if I could kind of catch it in the process of creation. And I started to observe some very interesting things, and that actually completely freezing water, it amazes me that I get the amount of imagery that I do, because it's so clear now that as water begins to freeze, it splits into informed and uninformed water. The water that has taken on the information adheres to the bottom of the glass petri dish extremely quickly, within minutes, and the water that has not taken on the information stays liquid for much longer. And so I only photograph the water which is informed, and it has created this crystallographic architecture on the glass petri dish. And it's a very thin layer, so it allows a lot of light to come through. So you can see how contrasting the imagery is when you look at the old technique compared to the new technique. It allows so much colour to come through, and it gives a very three-dimensional look. The image on the right is when my son projected the thought of an arrow into the water, because his name is Rama, and we were talking about Lord Rama. And Lord Rama in the Sanskrit scriptures and the Hindu scriptures, he always has a bow and arrow. And so we were talking about that. And so he projected the thought, and you can see that it almost looks like there's a little metal arrow that's in the water. So there's just some examples of influence and the response. So this is very clear. I put an egg into the petri dish of water, took the egg out, and you can see that there is an egg that is in the ice. I've done the same thing here. These are really easy because you can see what I've done and you can see the response. They're self-explanatory. The interesting one about this is that you can see that the knife itself was the inspiring influence, but the coasters on either side they kind of just happened to be on the bench. I wasn't paying any attention to them, but water is displayed that it saw them and that it took note of it. I wrote the number 4 for fourth phase water, and I got the number 4. I put the petri dish of water on top of grass and then froze it. And you can see how it's designed the grass. And these are just some examples. As you can imagine, I can't share the thousands and thousands that I have, so I picked a few for you to be able to see how incredibly sophisticated water can design. Water truly is the most incredible artist. And so you can see that the inspiring influences are on the right side and the ice is on the left side. And the eye that you can see was actually the inspiration was because I was crying from cutting onions, and a tear, and I always have some of these petri dishes lying around, so one of them had a bit of water in it, so I got my tear to go in the water and I froze it, and it froze just like the iris of my eye, as you can see on the left side. Mm-hmm. And there is a lot of complexity here. You can see I put my thumb into the water, and you can see that it's designed the thumb. So here are a few more. The interesting one about the top right photo is that I asked a woman at the early stages of her pregnancy to drink some water and leave me some to freeze, and to think of her child. And I've circled the image of the embryo that appeared in the ice. The image below that was from some water that a dog that was the same breed of a schnauzer dog that had drunk out of a bowl of water. And so I used some of the leftover water and froze it, and you can see it almost looks like an etching. The rest, they're all fairly self-explanatory. The interesting one about the center photo with the owl eye is that I have some beautiful books, and so I actually covered half the face of the owl, and I placed my petri dish of water on top of the other side of the owl that was covered, and it designed the actual covered part of the owl's eye without directly being on the actual image. Again, there are more, these are just more examples. And the cauliflower, the broccoli water was the water they used at the bottom middle, and you can see that's designed the broccoli. So there is a story behind all of these. There's always stories behind every single picture that I've taken. But what you can see in these images is that there is a clear artistic expression happening here, and it's not coincidental. So this next up I'm going to show the observation of intelligent conceptual artistic expression through words. So I wrote the word free energy, and I placed my petri dish of water over the word, and then I took it off, removed, put it into the freezer, and this is the image that I got. Free energy looks like, the picture looks like a demonstration from some of Tesla's work. It's truly one of my, I absolutely love this photo. The word ego is not something we could easily draw, but water has designed this incredible image of a man with this inflated head and this inflated body. And it's very representative of ego. In fact, you could say so much about this one picture. I wrote the word contemplation on one piece of paper and the word expansion on another piece of paper. And then I placed two petri dishes at the same time on top of these words, using the same water. My daughter helped me do this, so then I put them both into the freezer, pulled them both out at the same time. My daughter was holding one as I was photographing, and then I was holding one, and then we just kind of swapped dishes. So the interesting thing is we used the same water, just different words, froze them at the same time, but got completely different pictures that are very relative to the words. I used the word IVF, and it looks like a needle going through into an egg. So I did some work with water and dreams, And essentially I place a petri dish of water beside my bed before I go to sleep. This process takes my conscious awareness out of the equation, because many people say, well, maybe it's just your consciousness is affecting the water. And I'll talk more about that in the next talk that we have, because I really feel that's a very important thing to discuss, because I've come to understand that water unto itself is actually quite sovereign, and that there's this idea that we're influencing the water, because as people we have this general kind of feeling that how could, water have its own mind of such. So I really want to dive into that conversation with you, but I'll leave it at there for now. So I would then wake up after I've had a dream, and I dream quite vividly, and I often remember my dreams, and then I would take the water that was beside my bed, I put it in the petri dish beside my bed, and simply then place it in the freeze it using my technique, pull it out, and photograph it. And so basically this was a dream where I was in a sailboat and going through really big waves, and it was one of those dreams that seemed to go on forever, and the water captured the boat in these big waves. I'd been watching the Netflix series called Sweet Tooth, and I dreamt about that particular animal, human baby, and so water designed what I was dreaming about. There's this one person that saw this when I shared it on social media actually thought it was an animal to start with that had the babies with her, because essentially the dream was that I found this little creature making this little squeaky meowing kind of noise, and it was super silky and kind of looked a little bit like a cat crossed with an otter. And then I went looking for its mum, and I found its mum feeding these babies, and I put the baby back with the mother, and then I kind of moved on. And so the dream was very specific, and water picked the image up. There's a lot to be said more about dreams, because essentially it's as if water is traveling with you as the observer to observe what your subconscious is creating. So communication and connection. So I asked water, do you know who I am? And I didn't show it the image on the right. That's there for comparison, because that's actually how I write my initials. So water designed even better version of my initials. This is a very special and important photograph, and says a lot more about water's connection with all realms, and it's not just within this realm. And so the photo on the right is a picture of me when I was little and my mum, and she died in 1999. She literally was a walking angel, and she was also my best friend. And when I lived in Japan, before the days of cell phones and computers, we would write physical letters to each other. And at the end of every letter, my mum would attempt to do a circle, and her circles were terrible. She would be the first to admit it. And she'd draw a heart inside of the circle. And so when I asked the water, can you connect to my mum? And I saw this misshapen circle with a heart in the middle, it really, really spoke to me and said such a lot about what was happening in those realms, and how really there is this beautiful connection, because water is not always in its liquid stage. It's in multiple stages. It's in a liquid, solid, gas, and a type of gel. And as it's in a gas within the air, we can't see it, but it doesn't mean that it's not there. And so the idea that spirit and water are intimately connected, to me, just makes so much sense. This is an interesting example where a friend of mine whose dad had passed away, he's a big water guy, and so for his birthday he had asked me to put 2 petri dishes out overnight so all his friends from around the world could project their birthday wishes and goodwill and all the things into the water, into the dishes. And I made a 3rd dish that he didn't know about, each dish had the same amount of water in it. And so the third dish, I simply asked water to connect to his dad. And what was curious and interesting was that the water in the other two dishes had stayed the same, the exact amount before I froze it. But the water, which had the same amount of water in this particular example and dish, had actually diminished and evaporated considerably. So there was only a little bit of water left in the dish, and I didn't understand how that was possible, given that the other two had remained the same. And so when I just froze what was left, and all of the water froze into a heart. I asked the water, "What's your earliest memory?" And such an interesting response happened, and I sketched what I see in the ice sample. I was not expecting to see a face. So I don't know quite what that means, but what I've discovered is that water never lies, but water also came from different sources. If you consider that water doesn't just come from the clouds, originally 70% of the water on the surface of Earth actually came from meteorites and asteroids, making it an alien substance of which we know virtually nothing about, by molecular count, not volume, we're 99% of, and that there are more water molecules in our bodies than stars in the Milky Way. What do we really know?
Wow.
So water can show us the past, present, and future. This is an example of water showing me something from over 100 years ago. I took some water from a spring that ran through an area of historical Maori settlement in New Zealand. And when I first saw the image that appeared in the ice, I looked at it and I thought, you know what, that reminds me of the Maori food storage huts, which are called pātaka. And they were built on stilts so that the animals wouldn't climb up and get them. And sometimes they would store water in gourds inside there as well as food. And so I started looking through historical pictures of that area, and I found this sketch on the right of the Maori pātaka, and there are two of them, and you can see that there is a second one in the background of the ice. And so it was a very interesting thing to see the ice, be inspired to do some research, and then find an image that matched the ice from all of those years ago. So I've done a lot of repeat studies. I've been very much advised by the more scientific community to prove that this isn't coincidental. So I used the sound of Om. Thought the universal sound might be a good place to start, and these were taken at different times. And you can see that each time water has designed a very similar shape for the sound of Om. What I've discovered is that even within nature there can be very, very similar things, but there's always some little difference. So what I've observed with water is that it doesn't completely perfectly ever replicate an image. However, it's kind of as if there were a whole lot of different artists in a room, and the test was, well, the person said, just everybody sketch this, bowl of fruit. So everyone's picture will be of a bowl of fruit. It will just look slightly differently. Mm-hmm. And so I see the same thing happen with water, and each water almost has its own sort of sense of identity in a way, and its own way of expressing artistically. It's as if all the water molecules are working as a kind of collective to create imagery. I used the word the song "Stairway to Heaven." Songs are good mm-hmm. because they always stay the same, and every single time I would see the stairway appear in the Stairway to Heaven, and that got me thinking. I wonder if the word stairway, if this image of a stairway means stairway, or does it mean something else? So that's led me on to the work I'm very much focused on now, and that I'm going to be being filmed for a miniseries about, is something that I call hydroglyphs. So in the same way that a hieroglyph is an image that is meant to be felt and meant to kind of relay an entire concept and has layered meanings, I've found the exact same thing happens with water. So I wrote the word stairway, and I put my petri dish of water on top of it, used my method, froze it, pulled it out, and I got the stairway. So I'm like, okay. And then I did that 50 times. So to get one hydroglyph, I had to have done that process using a word as the inspiring influence and seen the same result happen at least 50 times. So over the last 3 and a bit years, I've been doing that, and I have 31 hydroglyphs. And it's taken me that long to figure out what they mean and what some of their layered meanings are.
Wow, fascinating.
Yeah, so the word love always creates hearts, and stress creates spikes. So when I went to see what water might do for the feeling of heartache, because I've projected feelings into water, I mean, there's not a lot I haven't done. I've used media, I've used music, I've used emotions, I've used energy, all kinds of different things. And so when I projected the feeling of heartache into water, it cleverly took the stress spikes and the love and created what in hieroglyphic terms means love stress.
Mm-hmm.
And then these are an example of some of my hieroglyphs. The coin means money. There's electrical charge, love. And this is just a handful of them. Pre-Easter and post-Easter, lungs and living and, addiction, sacred union, matrix. And there, as I've kind of kept doing this, there are some which have a lot of layered meanings, like the dagger glyph. It means danger, it means knife, it means dagger or knife, physical or emotional pain and danger. And I had someone who was in my private Facebook group for people that are actively doing this work, because like I've mentioned, I share my technique where people can get it and do it themselves. And I also do workshops teaching people how to do this. And in my advanced workshops, I talk them through all the hieroglyphs that they may see and how to work with them and what the meanings are. And one of these people, his daughter had done, had a crystallographic ice image, and I saw a staircase, a stairway, and 2 daggers. And this is it. And I've outlined them. So I saw a stairway and 2 daggers. So I wrote back to him and I said, could you tell your daughter just to be careful if she's climbing up something? Because I discovered that the stairway doesn't only mean stairway. I thought, well, what do you do with a stairway? You climb up. And so I used the word climb up as my inspiring influence, and I have had that many more times than 50 times. So it became another meaning, a layered meaning of the stairway. And so I said, can you ask her to please be careful if she's climbing up something? And so the other interesting thing, although I don't know how to, I haven't circled it, it's over the course, since then I've actually discovered another hieroglyph which is in there. It's to where the left dagger is, there's a kind of long leaf with a little, it's like a hexagonal shape with a long leaf. And that long-leafed hieroglyph means to rise up. So it's completely aligned with the whole climbing up something. And so the man immediately responded, and he said, oh my God, laughing, he said, we're about, tomorrow we are going to this place called Go Ape, where we're going to be climbing up these rope ladders and climbing up all of the trees and things, and I'll make sure and I'll tell her to be extra careful. So this was a message for his daughter, but it was a future message. It wasn't just in the present. So water, this has really, it's kind of in the past, it's in the present, it's in the future. This is my step-by-step guide that I teach, and this is some of the works that other people have done who have learnt my technique. You can see the Pisces symbol at the top. The apple was the influence at the top right. Someone had showed the water the mountain bottom, and you can see that there's a tree on the right. These are all different people that have been doing this work. So water has a kind of universal language and a universal way of responding to us as human beings and to our consciousness. And one of my inspirational people that I just think is fabulous is very well known, is Victor Schauberger. And what he said, and this is the end of this presentation, but what he said really is perfectly ties in with what I do. He said, as time passed, I began to play a game with water's secret powers. I surrendered my so-called free consciousness and allowed the water to take possession of it for a while. Little by little, this game turned into a profoundly earnest endeavor, because I realized that one could detach one's own consciousness from the body and attach it to that of the water. When my own consciousness was eventually returned to me, then the water's most deeply concealed psyche often revealed the most extraordinary things to me. As a result of this investigation, a researcher was born who could dispatch his consciousness on a voyage of discovery, as it were. In this way, I was able to experience things that had escaped other people's notice, because they were unaware that a human being is able to send forth its free consciousness into those places the eyes cannot see. By practicing this blindfolded vision, I eventually developed a bond with mysterious nature, whose essential being I then slowly learnt to perceive and understand.
Wow, that is absolutely incredible. If I hadn't seen the images, I'd have a hard time believing the depth and the scope of this research that you've done and how fascinating it is. Now, our time is up for today, Veda. I want to thank you so much for being on the show and for doing that presentation. But I want to encourage all the viewers to come back next week for part 2. So can you, in just sort of a short synopsis, tell people what they can expect on the next, on part 2 of this program?
Sure. Well, a lot of people ask me, is it you that is inspiring water? Is it your consciousness that is affecting water to design in this way? And I really would like to kind of get into that, because I touched on the idea that water might well be sovereign. It might be like a liquid spiritual force that actually can teach us things. And it's almost as if there's this kind of rudimentary stage where we're starting to kind of get our head around the idea that maybe water can do these things that seem so magical and so crazy. But when you got past that, water actually teaches you as if it truly is a spiritual teacher. And I want to talk about water and love, because I have been taught so much about what love truly is by working in this with this incredible energetic. And I'll share about how water really kind of can delve past into our subconscious and to almost read our minds. And I think that there are many avenues that we can talk about, because I think it's nice when people can see the work and they can see why I'm so enthusiastic and they can see what I'm talking about. But then we can start getting into what the messages that water has for us, not just not just what water can do for us as far as health, hydration, and all these kinds of things goes, but actually how is water outside of our body talking to the water inside of our body, and what has it got to say to the world?
Oh, fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. So I'm going to say goodbye for now, and thank you all for joining us, and do come back next week for part 2 of episode 50 of the Quantum Guide Show, where we're going to be talking more about the fabulous work of Veda Austin and the mysteries of water. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you for joining us for the Quantum Guide Show. Become the change you wish to see in the world. Subscribe to Karen's YouTube channel, click the like button, and share this show with your friends. Check out Karen's website at KarenHoltonHealthCoach.com. All the links are available in the description box below. Until the next time, keep up the good work.
Splendor in restlessness puts all my inner strife to rest. For time gives birth to hurriedness. It all makes sense, well, more or less. And the sages put me to their test. With heart and soul I do my best to find the answers to my quest. I wonder and I must confess, I don't know where it comes from, but I know it's okay. If this is all an illusion, then I'm willing to play. It's okay.